Welcome to the Grace City Eugene podcast. We exist to help every person in our sphere of influence to encounter Christ, experience biblical community, and extend God's kingdom. You can learn more about us at gracecityeugene.com. Here's the podcast. Well, hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Extended Cut. With me, as always, Pastor Chris Zahner. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Casey.
We got to come up with like a better cold open than this.
I think you're doing a phenomenal job, Casey.
Well, that makes one of us. This is our weekly podcast episode where we jump in and we dive a little deeper into whatever sermon is preached on Sunday. And so this week we get to hear from Pastor Chris as we wrapped up our Core Strength sermon series, which is a big deal. Before we get into that, want to do our little new upcoming segment here. We've got a couple upcoming things at Grace City that we're excited about. December 18th, we've got our family Christmas kickoff. It's going to be a great day. We're inviting you all to wear Christmas swag, your sweaters, your Santa hats, whatever you got, as long as it's appropriate. Please wear it and celebrate kind of a week-long Christmas focus at Grace City. We're also inviting y'all to bring some treats. We're excited to kind of hang around for a little bit after the service and munch on some yummy, sugary foods together.
There you go.
What are you excited about, the Christmas family kickoff? Or family Christmas kickoff?
I'm excited to see your Christmas sweater.
Oh.
Yes.
Are you?
Yes. Because I know what it is.
Well, see, that's where you might be wrong.
Okay.
I've been thinking about getting a new one.
Okay. Tell me more.
Well, so I have this Ducks one that lights up and everything. It's very fun.
I had special knowledge, and you just spilled it to the world.
I know.
Or all 30.
Well, you told me to tell you more.
You're right.
Yeah, so.
My wife tells me I'm confusing.
Me too. Anyways, I've been thinking about switching it up because, I'm preaching this coming Sunday. I don't know about preaching in a bright green and yellow light up sweater. I might try to find something slightly more subtle. But who knows? We'll see.
I'll be praying for you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Well, that's what you're looking forward to the most, huh?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hear you bring the word as well.
Yeah, no, it would be cool. We're doing 2 messages in a little series called Unlocking Christmas. First one's going to be on December 18th. The second one's going to be on December 23rd at our Christmas Eve service. And get to kick that off this weekend. It's going to be a good time, which naturally leads into our Christmas Eve service on December 23rd. It's going to be a great time of scripture reading, kind of classic Christmas worship. We'd say Christmas carols, but Christmas carols is kind of this really broad, like we're not going to be singing.
We're not singing about snowmen.
No, and we're not singing jingle bells and all that. Like we're going to sing about King Jesus. And
come on, Case.
Excited for that. Oh. And Pastor Chris will give the second message in that Unlocking Christmas series then. It's going to be a really great time. We'd love to have you join us for that.
Yes.
Please invite your friends, invite your family. It's going to be a really special service as we remember just the power of God's presence, the fact that he chose to join us, to enter into our world to be our Savior. And so excited to do that. We've got no in-person or online service on December 25th, though that is a Sunday. We're going to be taking the weekend off. So enjoy time with your family and then jump in back with us on January 1st, where we will, as always, do our Grace City Top 10 of 2022. So that's what's coming up. You can always stay up to date with what's going on at Grace City by following along on social media, RE Weekly, all that good stuff. But that's upcoming. Now, Pastor Chris, this week, you preached a sermon called Better Together in this Core Strength sermon series. If you've not listened to it yet, go check it out. It's going to be a great listen. But for those of us that maybe did, we were there Sunday. We caught the podcast afterwards. But we might just need a little refresher. Share me part of the message on Sunday.
Little refresher. Well, at the end of the book of Colossians, Paul lists all of these people, and he's giving kind of greetings and, hey, this person said what's up and this person might be coming through. You've been given instruction how to treat them, how to interact with them. And interlaced in all of these names is a story that the people of this place would have known. When we read it, unless we do extra work, we're like, okay, I'll skip by that and just move on to the next book. And so what we did is we looked at who each of these people are, why their story mattered, and what it communicated to this church from Paul. And then we kind of zoomed out a little and said, hey, every story in this room matters, right? Like there's a reason that God has woven us all together to be this tapestry or this representative of the kingdom of heaven. And how when we are all together and all our stories together and our experiences and all of that, like we are better together. We are a better family for King Jesus. We are a better representative. The illustration I used was it makes our reflection pool bigger to reflect the light of Jesus into this world. And so just this idea that Paul would end a letter with the, hey, I've told you why Jesus needs to be at the core, why and how he is supreme. He is all sufficient. But like at the end of the day, this is the we, this is the who behind all this. This is the stories, the lives, the names behind why we do what we do. And that mattered enough to him to include it here. We also see it in Romans 16 in a similar fashion, a bunch of names that are really hard to pronounce. And so what does that look like in our context? And what does that mean for us as a community of followers of Jesus, not just as individuals trying to follow Jesus? And so that was the basic gist of it.
That's really good. What were some of the more difficult aspects in preparing for this sermon besides
pronunciation?
Pronounce a bunch of Greek translated to English names.
Yeah, I listened to
help you out and call him like Paul.
I know he was one of them. John Mark, that was a good one. Luke, that was good. No, I seriously, I listened to Tim Mackey pronounce all the names. I listened to my British dude narrating on the Bible app, and
Nicky Gumbel, I think.
Is that one him?
I believe so.
Okay, look at you dropping names. Founder of the Alpha Project, by the way. And so, that was a challenge. And then you get in the moment, and you may have noticed this about me. I just get going, and things just start coming, and I'm like, okay, I need to intentionally pause and take a breath before I say these names, so I don't just say them however they look in my head. So that was one thing. Another is there's a lot that could be said about some of these folks.
Sure.
There's a lot that could be said about Paul. Why he references himself. The nature of how he ends and begins his letters and the significance of a greeting and a farewell in all of his letters, really. Sure. And you could probably have a sermon just on that and the importance of the greeting and the wrapping it up. And, that last line, he's like, remember my chains and grace to you. And I don't remember which translation that is. It may not be exactly what NIV said that I preached out of. But, there's just so much in there. And for a very short book, I found myself continuously having to say, okay, God, that's awesome, whatever I'm learning in my study. But which parts are for Sunday?
Sure.
And that proved to be a challenge. And how do you take a list of names, turn it into a sermon that people will not fall asleep in?
Sure.
It felt at times like trying to preach through a genealogy, where you're like, okay, how do I get enough context in here that people understand why these names are important, but not just bore them with some seminar on Greek family life. So, that was some of the inherent challenges, but God was gracious, and I felt like pretty early on I knew where we were going with it. And so that helps, because then it's okay, how do I focus on that part through this instead of gosh, what do I do with these 11 names, 7 of which aren't easy to pronounce. And
right. Well, and it's cool that the Bible gives so much context on some of these people. You're not just going to read about Demas in this letter, like you can read about him here too, where we were worried about him, and where Paul's writing to Timothy saying, "Hey,
falling into pleasure.
This is what's going on with our guy Demas and all this," and you can read about so and so back in Acts. That's where they first pop up. Like none of these are just maybe one or two of these guys are kind of more one-off. We don't have a lot of context for, but
you see Tychicus in Ephesians as well, right? And it's his role there, and so. Yeah.
And I just think that this context stuff is so helpful for me anytime. Like it is one of the difficult things that I find, like, because I opened this sermon series was being like, man, how I feel like I can't set the stage enough.
Yeah.
Because there's so much good stuff, because the more you understand the context, the more you see the names and the faces and the stories and you hear what's going on, the more when you come across a verse, you're like, wow, that's why Paul said that way. That's why he wrote what he wrote in this. He's addressing that kind of person or that specific need in that culture. And it's one of those things we can get bogged down sometimes spending too much time in it for sure and never get to the meat and potatoes, what we really need to go and actually live this stuff out. But man, there's just such a depth and richness to really sitting and unpacking some of these details.
In a world where communication is so instant and unlimited in our means to communicate, I think we can often forget how precise and calculated people would have been in communicating in this time.
Sure.
And by throwing out a name, it wasn't like how we might name drop because we know someone on a Dutch football team or something, right? Like it's, hey, I'm communicating this name because of the story, the context, what y'all know about them. Like, it's very specific, and we can just miss out on what Paul's actually saying for, 11 verses, the final 11 verses of this book in the Bible, if we don't understand the stories with the names, who they are. Like, if you don't know, like, who Onesimus is and his relationship to Philemon, like, how do you have any clue of what Paul's communicating in that? Like, it's more important that you be good Christians than navigate this slave-master relationship. Be Christians, follow Jesus, and it'll take care of those things, right? And so it's always fascinating to, when you put in the work, how the depth of understanding it's exponential.
Absolutely. No, it's really good.
Or in this case, if somebody else puts in the work for you, you can just read their stuff. Thank you, Adam Mabry.
Yes, no, there are some great resources for this stuff. So what on the other hand of this, what was enjoyable for you? What did you really just like in prepping for this sermon?
Well, it's no secret that this topic is kind of a big deal to me. It's this idea of community, relationship, and the value that each person in their story and their journey with Jesus brings to the table with a family. And so feeling like that was the way the angle I was supposed to take. It was kind of like, ooh, here we go. Yep. And then when God gave me that correlation in my prayer time of the Sierra Leonean church and our relationships there and how that kind of can paint a picture of the stories behind it and all of that. And that didn't pop into my mind. Well, I had the conversation Saturday. So it was Saturday night and I was like, oh my gosh, that's perfect.
Yeah.
If it would have happened midweek, I probably could have worked it in more smoothly.
Sure.
But when that illustration doesn't happen till the day before you preach it. So it is what it is, but I don't think that necessarily takes away from the impact of that. But what I felt about that illustration was so much more than I had the words to convey in the limited amount of time I had to bridge that gap. So but that was. And then Corey, who's very connected with it, she's the whole time you just see her when I say each name, So it's fun.
Yeah, no, that is cool. Y'all really do go into a different world when you start talking about Sierra Leone. It is so I was glad to hear you admit that for one, and also just to see your heart in it too was cool. Yeah. Well, I'll ask kind of a one-off question here. That illustration came up Saturday evening as you're hanging out with Corey and the fam. What were some of your ideas? What kind of other illustrations were you thinking of? Or
I didn't have anything yet.
yeah, still waiting on some.
Wait on the Lord. I will often, like, the illustrations, at least my opening illustration, that's the last thing I do.
Sure.
And so technically not the last thing, because then Sunday morning I'll format it the way I like it once I know it's all together, and I make the text bigger for reading, and I do all that. But that last thing is that opening illustration. It's kind of dictated by where am I landing the plane? How does my main thread develop? And I don't want to put an illustration in and let my illustration dictate how we're unpacking the word. And so I don't put anything there till the end. So it was just like the grace of God that I'm like, I don't know, we'll figure it out. Like, I knew where we were going. I knew where we were landing the plane. And then that conversation was had. And I didn't like pigeonhole that conversation so I could get material. It just happened. And then later I'm like, oh my goodness. That's it.
Yep.
Yeah. So
it's a God thing.
Yeah, it's like he cares about his word being preached faithfully and clearly to his people, you know, and he'll even intervene and do things about it. So.
I love that. That's cool.
Yeah.
What other kinds of thoughts or ideas have you had as you've been thinking about this sermon? Maybe it's more details or thoughts on some of the characters, or just more this community focus. What's kind of been rolling through your head post sermon?
One thing I didn't really go into, if you've been around our community long enough, you've heard me say it, but I didn't say it explicitly with this, is like, I made the appeal that, like, when you're here, your story contributes to our reflection, our ability to minister, reflect God in various experiences and circumstances. But if I had to preach it again, I would probably try to also work in, like, the value of knowing other stories.
Yeah.
Like the intentional focus of learning the stories, not just bringing yours, but you don't know where to connect people if you don't know their stories, even in the context of community. And so to me, the way I interact with people from the very get-go is very intentionally to hear their story, what makes them tick, because I'm looking for a way to, well, that's something we have in common. Great, let's talk about that. So some things that are more inherent for me, I will often forget that it's not for everybody, and that needs to be encouraged. And so just the value of intentionally learning the stories around you is also a significant piece of making us better together, right? Like, if I don't know how to get to your house or where you live, or like, how can I go visit you if you have needs? Like, just knowing how the roadmap of our community and where intersections are and different things. If you don't know people in our church and someone's coming in and they're like, yeah, I'm studying pre-med, you don't know, hey, you need to go meet Dr. Luke, right? Oh, I'm a student here from Hawaii. Oh, you need to meet Megan, right? She's in her third or fourth year here from, the COVID messes that up a little bit, but she's from Oahu. Like, hey, love for you to meet her. Like, we have people that get you, that can connect with you, that may have some shared experiences, but if you don't know them. And so just the value of taking ownership in your community, contributing what God's done in your life, and then learning what he's done in others, hearing people's stories. So,
No, that's really good. And it's funny, I think I used to be more on the opposite side of that, where, like, I love to be known. I love to tell my story. I love, like, letting people in on the details of my life. And over time realizing that's like, man, I'm not a good listener. I'm not very intentional to ask people, do you have a similar story or a similar circumstance, or even just what's going on in your life kind of thing. Like, super eager to have an open heart and just share everything. Like, I got no secrets from you. I'll tell you anything you ask me about. And realized over time, I was like, man, I don't do a good job of creating that opportunity for other people. And it's been fun as I've kind of just invited the Lord into that over the past few years. It's like, when I'm going to hang out with somebody, like, feeling pressed on my heart, like, I want to walk away feeling like I made this far more about them than then they could have made it about me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it almost borderline feels competitive sometimes, almost to the point that I have to realize that it's like, no, it's very good for people to also care for me, and for me to like be okay with them being empowered to ask me about things. Because
rejecting care is actually prideful, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But like I just want that to like walk into spaces and care far more about someone else feeling heard and known and seen than me having to be the one that's constantly receiving that because I'm bold enough to do it.
Right.
Like I used to not need you to ask me to like open up about things. I'll find ways to talk about it. I'll find ways to bring it up. And now it's funny because it's almost the opposite sometimes, where like I'll be with somebody that I consider like a good friend. They're like, I had no idea that about you. I'm like, well, you didn't ask.
You didn't ask.
And so it's funny how God can really work on that.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people that maybe are really good at being open and telling their stories, like we do have to go through this process of like, God, help me create this for other people, because for a lot of people that's not natural at all, and it's very difficult even when you do create the space for them to tell their story. As a videographer, I see it all the time. Like, we convince somebody to do a baptism testimony or something, they filled out the questionnaire, they prepped everything, and they get in front of the camera. It's still very challenging. Like, for some people that's just how it is, and you have to be a faithful, like, honest and caring presence who can win their heart, who can earn their trust, and we got to be really diligent to create those opportunities for other people to be heard as well.
Yeah, no, that's good. Something that came up in you and I's conversation is, in these last few messages, full disclosure to those listening, I get to the end and I see the time and I'm like, oh shoot, there I go again.
Yeah.
Because this stuff fires me up and there's so much that could be said, and I end up, usually adding a few things along the way. And so I will like just kind of on the fly try cutting some stuff, trim it down, because I'm like, oh man, this is like been 50 minutes. And so unfortunately, one of the ones that I like took a paragraph out of was the character of Nympha, and which is probably not poor choice, but I was just on the fly. It wasn't because I, wanted to cut the importance of Paul elevating and giving dignity to a female.
Sure.
But you had some really good just thoughts about that. And instead of me, like, I had some stuff written down, but the way you put it, and I really appreciate it. So I just want to hear you help us learn more about why that was important, Casey, sir.
Yeah. What's so cool about Paul, and honestly, even when I did my sermon a few weeks back, when he's writing to the household, when he's talking about wives and children and even their slaves, is that any time that Paul is addressing women or children kind of in like that first person, recognizing them in like the same level of importance that they should be directed to in this letter as well, is extremely countercultural to what were the standards in Rome at the time. The husband was the head of the house, and it was only a priority to address him. Everything that needed to get passed along, he just would do so. And there was no dignity given to women and children in that culture that you would feel the need to recognize their achievement, their characteristics, their generosity, whatever it may be, kind of thing. Like, that just was not a part of their culture. And so when Paul goes and he names her and he talks about why he's so grateful for her and what she's done for the church and all this, it's so countercultural. And I just think that's so special, and it fights against some of the narratives we hear in our day and age that Paul is anti-woman and all these different kinds of things. Like, no, he was very countercultural in his writings, and the New Testament is as a whole. Grace City Corvallis, I know right now they're doing like a cool sermon series on some of the women involved in the Christmas narratives and different things like that. Like, the New Testament was so countercultural to the day and age that it existed within, and how it elevates and honors women in a world that had zero priority to do so whatsoever.
Yeah, well, that's good. The way that I had it in my notes, informed by Pastor Adam Mabry, said when he mentions Nympha, he raised this woman to a level of dignity that was not afforded by her culture. And I just love how he puts it that way. He says a woman in those times, even a wealthy one like her, see, we think like, well, they're wealthy. They get inherent dignity and value. But even a wealthy woman like her was not considered to have equal value to a man. And Paul's reminding us that we all have an equal role to play. Yep. And as he puts it here, we all are equally valued as actors or actresses on this grand stage of redemption. And again, not my language, but I love that idea. Like, no, we all have equal roles to play on this stage of redemption, this redemptive story, this narrative. And so, I think it's important to hit and worth circling back around to.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Well, we've just got a couple minutes left of footage time here. As we wrap up the Core Strength series, what's kind of your heart in summary for our community?
Oh, heart and summary for our community.
55 minutes
Jesus
later.
is enough. This world will try to give you plenty of counterfeits, alternatives, or add-ons. Cultural upgrades, which Jesus does not need upgraded.
Amen.
He needs faithfulness, obedience, and humility out of the people that are willing to follow him and live a life that way. And so anything that tries to, repackage or repurpose the gospel is false. Yeah. It is dangerous. And being faithful to who Jesus is, how he calls us to live, doing that in community with him at the center of everything is of utmost importance.
Wow, look at that.
There you go.
That was gold.
Just right off the cuff.
Amen. Jesus is enough. I love that.
Yes.
That's good.
Cool.
Well, thanks for tuning in to this week's edition of the Extended Cut. We'll see you probably in the next week. I don't know. Are we going to do this for the Christmas stuff?
We'll get one next week.
We'll do one at least next week.
And we'll take a break for Christmas and New Year and be back second week of January.
That whole thing. We'll share this with someone you love, someone that you think would be blessed by this conversation, as well as the original sermon too. But otherwise, join us this Sunday, December 18th, for our family Christmas kickoff. It's going to be a great time.
Come on.
Wear your sweaters. Bring a treat to share. We'll see you soon.
Take care.